This installment of our Lunch and Learn sessions is on the topic of labor curving. And what we've done in 7.0 is basically build upon what we had in prior releases. And it's all based on using formulas to calculate your labor. Let me bring up one of those formulas. And it's pretty simple. Basically what we're doing is calculating the time that it takes to do a particular task. We take the time, which is in minutes, the way we've built our formulas, and we're multiplying that times product labor adjustment, and we're dividing by 60 to get us a time in hours. So the time cell here is in minutes. And the key thing is this labor adjustment field. So if we're not curving the labor, there's no need to deal with economies of scale, whether you're on an unusually long run of some building some kind of product, or maybe it's a short run, maybe it's a prototype. When it's just one, and that's the situation right now in my example, the labor adjustment is a 1, and that's on this subassembly row, which is being fed by my product row. Essentially no curving takes place. Whatever the time is to do this particular task is being used in this little calculation. However, if we raise or lower the labor adjustment, we're going to raise or lower the time that it takes to do this task accordingly. So in order to plug into our automated curving, our labor curving, you will have to create formulas as I've shown you here, and then adjust the time based on this labor adjustment factor. Now prior to 7.0, we did this at runtime, so it was up to the estimator to go in and highlight X number of rows, to do a mass change on labor adjustment. Usually this was done up here on the product level. Let me collapse this down. So we would, of course that was called in-group prior to 7.0. So we would go through and highlight X number of rows that we want to adjust, and we would do a mass change. Well, that was a lot of work. You might have a humongous estimate, might have different products that you want to curve, other ones you don't. So it really, it worked, but it took some time, and there was always the possibility of missing out on some rows. So what we've done in 7.0 is build upon this a good bit to try to automate it as much as we possibly can. And what we've done is basically allow you to set up how you want curving to work, and then at estimate time, it's as easy as hitting a button. Right there it is. We'll do this in just a little bit. Let's first take a look at how you would set up labor curving. So we go up to Options, Estimate, and on the last tab here is labor curving. And there's just a couple things that we need to identify in order to plug into the automated labor curving. Number one, you need to choose one of your work groups, and you need to use that work group to identify the kind of product. Okay, so in our database we have these 5 work groups, and this middle one, type, is what we're using to identify the type of product. And I mean, this can be as broad or as granular as you need be. So in our database here we've got 6 products, and this first one, casework, we are definitely laying out how we want any kind of casework product to be curved. I'll get to that in a moment. Now the other thing is we need to identify the custom column that we're using to house our labor adjustment. In our database we're calling that custom column lab adjust for labor adjustment, and we just simply identify it in the drop-down list here of the 20 potential columns. And once we have this information, we're ready to lay out exactly how we want to curve our labor. There's lots of rules here, but it's pretty smart, so if you don't quite get it right, it's going to give you a gentle little reminder. So it won't be hard to set this up. Basically, you can have any number of rows. You don't have to have 5 rows. Let's take any, like on countertops, I've got 3 rows set up. Now you will have on one of your rows minimum quantity of 0. And this is where we get things rolling. So in this example, I'm basically saying that if in the context of running labor curving, and I'll show you that in a moment, it might be the whole estimate, it might be just 1 or 2 nodes of the tree. But this rule is saying that based on the context of the labor curving run, if I have between 0 and 5, and that's quantity, of casework, well, I'm going to apply a labor curving factor of 1.3. In other words, this is a pretty short run. I'm going to increase the number of hours from what I would normally run. And that, by the way, is down here. Wherever you see a labor curving of 1, 1.0, this is our standard. This would be what we would typically see in a job. And if you remember from the beginning of this presentation, if it's a 1, there is no labor curving. We're simply multiplying, in our case, the time required for a task by 1. It's going to be that time. We're not raising it. We're not lowering it. And that's another rule. In every one of these setup work groups, you're going to see at least one row has a labor curving factor of 1.0. Okay. And if you don't do that, like I said, it will gently remind you that we have an issue, and you'll go ahead and address that. The other thing that's going on here is we're basically stepping up, so you don't want to have any quantities that are missing. So you'll see on this first row, 5 is the min and the max being 5. I wouldn't want to start here from 7. If I did that, it's going to remind me that it has to be sequential. Okay, and I mean that's about it. You want to set up as many ranges here that you would need to properly adjust your labor quantity. This example, I've got 5. This one here, I've got 3. The only other thing here that we need to point out is on that last range, we suggest that you don't put a number there unless it is a very, very large number and you know that you'll never have a quantity greater than that. Or you can just simply use this keyword up, and essentially that means to infinity. So if it's 401, as far as countertop, whatever our unit of measure is, I don't remember, whatever from 401 up to infinity, it's going to get a factor of 1.0. Okay, so that's really all there is to setting up labor curving. Let me OK out of there. Now there's a couple things that you probably want to do to make this easier on yourselves. In my example here, I'm using assemblies. I was dragging them in to this estimate as I built it up. So I don't really want to deal with my default labor adjustment here at estimate time, and if I move to the right, I don't want to be tagging my my product types at estimate time. I've got enough to do just to get all these products dragged over and get the right takeoff quantities. So what we would recommend you do, that if you are using assemblies, then let's go ahead and open this one up. What you want to do is make sure that the assembly has these default values. So labor adjustment here, we would want that to default to 1. If we move to the right, bring up the product type right here, casework, you want to make sure that's filled in correctly for the kind of assembly. And that way, when you're dragging these things back into the estimate, everything is in place for you to curve it should you need to, because it's an unusually short or long run. All right, the only other thing that you need to understand before we request labor curving up here is the tree. The tree allows you to define the scope of the labor curving run. For example, if I only was interested in determining quantity and curving it based on my setup curving directives, if I was only interested in room A12, I would highlight it, and then I would click labor curving. That's going to exclude everything else in the estimate that hasn't been selected. And you can select as many nodes as you wish. You know, if you wanted these 3 nodes, then fine. You just want to hold down your control key when you're clicking on the tree nodes. Now for my run, I want to curve it for the whole estimate. So since I don't have any change orders, I could select base bid. Right? No change orders down here. Or I could select the very topmost level, which would be the root. And that's what I'll do. So I go over here, I click I click labor curving, and it won't take long. It reports back to me that for my casework, I actually, based on the quantities that I had in my estimate, I definitely exceeded my typical run. So it's giving me a factor here of 0.6. And if I go down here a little bit further, yeah, and I also have countertop in this estimate. This is different. So actually my countertop quantity was less than my typical countertop run, and I can see that it's using a factor of 1.5. It's increasing the hours. Okay, so I'm assuming that my hours went down because I probably have a heck of a lot more casework in here than countertop. So I'm gonna let's OK out of there, and let me take you back here to the estimate setup, just to show you that. So for casework, we see 0.6 here. So I must, in this run, if I was to count them up, I must have exceeded 201 units of casework, because there's 0.6 right there. And if I go down to countertop, and it was coming back with a quantity of 1.5, so I must have been somewhere in here as far as my quantity, as far as unit of countertop. Okay. Now, if I look at line types here, I didn't show you this prior to beginning the session, but this was up around 520 hours. So I had so much casework in there that it definitely dropped my labor down. And because there's fewer hours, even though my unit cost stays the same for 1 hour of labor, this cost went down as well. I think what I'll do, just real quick, let me put this back the way it was, and that's handy to know too, because what if you run labor curving and you just don't like the results? Maybe you want to go back and tweak your labor curving factors because you can just see it isn't working out properly. Let me show you how to do that. Then we can also get a baseline for what happens when you run this. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to back out labor curving. And how I do that, let me go down here to room A12. Essentially what that means is on my labor adjustment for every product, you can see here that it used to be 1. Well, after labor curving, it's 0.6. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move a 1 to every product's labor adjustment in the whole estimate. The way I do that is I will use our Find Replace dialog box. So I'm going to come in here where line type, and I've done this in the past, guys. That's why this is already sitting here. It remembers your last run. Where line type is equal to product, I'm doing it for the entire estimate, I'm going to go ahead and first find all of the instances throughout my estimate where I have a line type of product. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them all. Then I'm going to go to change. Because I selected them all, they're already sitting here ready to be changed. And what I'm going to do, again, it's remembering my last change I made. I'm going to change the labor adjustment field from whatever it is, and I'm going to move a 1 in there. And as soon as I do that, it's going to recalc accordingly. Okay, so I'm going to say, let's see here, change all. Okay. Now if I go back up here to line types, now it's sitting at 560 hours. So you can see that went up considerably. So let me write that down. 560, and our total cost here is $37,000, a little in some change, just about $37,000. And if I go back to line types, again, it was 560 hours for a cost of, what is that, $38,380. So this is our baseline. So let's go ahead and rerun labor curving, and then we can see how these numbers have been affected. Again, my scope, I want the entire estimate, so I make sure that that is selected. I come over here to the button, and I click it. It does its thing, and it also reports back to me the rows that have been affected by the curving run. And as I would expect, it did exactly the same thing. It found X number of rows that were marked as casework. It adds up all of the quantities of the rows based on the scope of the run. It finds the right labor curving range that we set up. It puts that labor adjustment rate in based on the labor curving parameters. And it's going to rerun, or it's going to recalc the entire estimate all in one fell swoop. Okay, so let's take a look at this again. We'll see that this has indeed changed. It was 560, now it's 400. This was $8,300 and some change. Well, now it's $6,288. And if we go to the summary tab, we'll see that the cost is now $34,900. It was $37,000. So there was obviously a lowering of the labor costs because of the curving that we've applied to this estimate.